I'm Jane, 34 female. I live in a city where the skyline is a testament to ambition, in a glass-walled apartment that overlooks the very structures I helped design. I'm a lead architect at one of the country's most prestigious firms, a job that requires precision, foresight, and an unshakable belief in the integrity of a foundation. My life is a fortress of my own making, built with materials of discipline and silence, with every window facing forward and every door to the past sealed shut. It's a quiet, orderly existence, and for over 2 decades it has been enough. But foundations can be tested. A few weeks ago, the past I had buried under 22 years of concrete and steel came knocking, not at my door, but at the gleaming, marble-floored lobby of my office building. They came looking for a person they didn't know, a child they had thrown away, hoping to find a solution to problems I had never created. They were about to learn that the little girl they left behind didn't just catch up. She built a world they would never be allowed to enter. Before this story unfolds, I'd love to connect with you. Please let me know in the comments where you're watching from and what time it is in your corner of the world. It's amazing to see how far these stories can travel. The summer I turned 12 was suffocatingly hot, the kind of heat that melts the asphalt on the highway and makes the air shimmer like a mirage. We were on our annual family road trip, an institution my father, Richard, insisted upon with the same empty fervor he applied to all his grand ideas. He called them memory-making expeditions, but they were really just long, grueling drives punctuated by his monologues about missed opportunities and the failings of others. The destination this year was some forgotten national park 3 states away, a place none of us had any real desire to see. The real purpose of the trip, as always, was to confine us all to the stale, recycled air of our wood-paneled station wagon, a rolling prison where his authority was absolute. Our family had a rigid, unspoken hierarchy. My father was the blustering, insecure king. My older brother, Kevin, 16 and already a perfect echo of my father's casual cruelty, was the crown prince. My mother, Brenda, was the silent, accommodating courtier, whose main role was to absorb my father's moods and ensure the boat was never rocked. And I was the court jester, the afterthought, the one whose needs were always negotiable and whose presence was often treated as an inconvenience. Kevin was the star athlete, the one with the easy charm that fooled teachers and coaches. I was the quiet one with a sketchbook, the girl who would rather diagram the anatomy of a leaf than listen to my father's rants about his boss. This difference made me an easy target. My interests were weird, my quietness was sullen, and my existence, it seemed, was a constant, low-grade irritation. The tension in the car that day was thicker than the humidity. My father had been passed over for a promotion, and the bitterness radiated from him in waves. Kevin, bored and restless, had spent the last 100 miles flicking my ear every time I drifted off to sleep. My mother sat in the passenger seat, her hands clenched in her lap, her face a mask of strained neutrality. I had retreated into the only safe space I had, my sketchbook, where I was designing a treehouse with intricate spiral staircases and hidden rooms, a place no one else could enter. "Still drawing your stupid little doodles, Janie?" Kevin sneered, snatching the book from my hands. Before I could grab it back, he held it up for our father to see in the rearview mirror. "Look, Dad, she's going to be an artist. Live in a box and draw squirrels." My father grunted, his eyes barely leaving the road. "Put that thing away," he said, his voice flat. "It's a waste of paper. Learn a useful skill for once." My mother said nothing. She just stared out the window, pretending to be fascinated by the endless stretch of cornfields. I felt the familiar sting of shame and anger, a hot lump forming in my throat. I didn't cry. Crying only made it worse. It was what they wanted, a reaction that proved they had gotten to me. Instead, I stared out my own window, my jaw tight, and focused on the rhythmic thump of the tires on the pavement. After another hour of simmering silence, my father abruptly pulled into a sprawling rest stop. It was one of those massive, impersonal places with a sterile food court, clean but soulless bathrooms, and a gift shop full of cheap souvenirs. 15 minutes, he announced, cutting the engine. "And don't wander off." The command was directed at me, as always. Kevin was already out of the car, stretching his long legs and smirking. My mother was busy rummaging through her purse for something, her movements small and agitated. I just wanted to use the bathroom and get a cold drink to feel solid ground under my feet for a few minutes. As I walked toward the main building, I felt a sense of relief. The rest stop was a temporary oasis, a neutral zone where the oppressive atmosphere of the car couldn't follow. Inside, the air conditioning was a blessing. I went to the bathroom, washed my face with cool water, and stared at my reflection in the mirror. A thin, pale girl with serious eyes stared back. I wondered if anyone else saw the person I felt I was inside, someone who wasn't an inconvenience, someone who had ideas and dreams. I bought a lemonade from a vending machine with the few dollars I had saved and walked back outside, deciding to sit on a bench under a large oak tree instead of returning to the food court where my family was probably arguing over what to eat. The shade was deep and cool, and a slight breeze rustled the leaves. From my bench, I could see our car parked near the exit. I watched as my father, mother, and Kevin emerged from the building. Kevin was laughing, holding a half-eaten hot dog. My father clapped him on the shoulder. My mother trailed behind them, carrying a small bag of chips. They looked like a normal family from a distance. A happy one, even. A small, painful knot tightened in my chest. I wanted to be part of that picture, to be the one my father laughed with, to have my mother look at me with something other than weary resignation. I took a slow sip of my lemonade, savoring the sharp, sweet taste and the brief moment of peace. I decided to give them a few more minutes before I went back. A few more minutes of being just a girl on a bench, and not the unwanted cargo in the back of the family car. The sun was starting to dip lower in the sky, casting long shadows across the parking lot. I watched the flow of traffic, cars and trucks pulling in and out, a constant river of people on their way to somewhere else. I finished my lemonade and crushed the can in my hand, the metallic crinkle loud in the relative quiet of my shady spot. It was time to go back. I stood up, stretched my legs, and started walking toward our station wagon, my worn-out sneakers scuffing against the pavement. My stomach was in a tight knot, a familiar feeling of dread that always accompanied the end of any brief reprieve. The thought of climbing back into that stifling car, of enduring more hours of Kevin's taunts and my father's simmering rage, made my steps feel heavy. As I got closer, I saw the rear passenger door on my side was still open, as if waiting for me. That was unusual. My father was a stickler for neatness and order, at least when it came to his vehicle. Leaving a door ajar seemed sloppy, an oversight he wouldn't normally make. I was about 50 feet away when I saw my father get into the driver's seat. My mother was already in her usual spot, and Kevin was slouched in the back, his headphones on. My pace quickened slightly. They were getting ready to leave. I saw my father's head turn, and for a split second, I thought our eyes met through the rearview mirror. I was sure he saw me. A small, almost imperceptible nod of his head seemed to confirm it. Then he turned back, put the key in the ignition, and the engine rumbled to life. The sound sent a jolt of confusion through me. He was starting the car before I had even reached it. I started to jog, my heart beginning to beat a little faster. This had to be a joke, one of my father's cruel tests of character. He liked to create situations where he could later lecture us on preparedness or punctuality. "The world doesn't wait for you," he'd say, his voice dripping with condescension. As I picked up my pace, I heard Kevin's window roll down. He leaned his head out, a wide, malicious grin spreading across his face. "Hurry up, slowpoke," he yelled, his voice laced with amusement. Then, to my utter disbelief, my father put the car in drive. The station wagon lurched forward, slowly at first, then gaining speed as it pulled out of the parking space. The open rear door swung shut with a dull thud. I broke into a full sprint, my legs pumping, my lungs starting to burn. "Wait!" I shouted, my voice sounding thin and weak against the noise of the engine. "Wait, I'm here!" The car didn't slow down. It reached the edge of the parking lot and paused, the red brake lights glowing like malevolent eyes. I thought with a surge of relief that they were stopping. The joke was over. My father would get out, scold me for being slow, and then we would leave. But the car turned right, merging onto the access road that led back to the interstate. That's when I heard my father's voice, carried on the wind, a sound that would be seared into my memory forever. He was laughing. It wasn't a warm or joyful laugh. It was a harsh, barking sound, full of mockery. Through Kevin's still-open window, I heard him say the words that would sever the last thread of hope I had for my family. "Let's see if she can catch up." Kevin's laughter joined his, high-pitched and cruel. I kept running, my mind refusing to process what was happening. My legs ached, a sharp stitch forming in my side. I could see my mother's silhouette in the passenger seat. She was completely still, her head facing forward. She didn't turn around. She didn't look back. She did nothing. The car reached the on-ramp, its turn signal blinking rhythmically, a mocking little pulse of light. It merged into the flow of highway traffic, just another vehicle heading east. I slowed to a stop, my breath coming in ragged, painful gasps. I stood on the grassy shoulder of the access road, my hands on my knees, and watched as the wood-paneled station wagon shrank into the distance. I watched until its taillights, two tiny red dots, blended in with all the others and then disappeared completely. The world went silent. The sounds of the highway faded into a dull roar. The chirping of crickets in the nearby grass sounded unnaturally loud. I was utterly, completely alone. The initial panic was replaced by a strange and terrifying clarity. This wasn't a joke. This wasn't a lesson. They had left me. The laughter echoed in my ears, my father's derision, my brother's cruelty, my mother's silence. It wasn't just that they had driven away. It was the casualness of it, the amusement they found in my desperation. I stood there for what felt like an eternity, the crushed lemonade can still clutched in my hand. The metal dug into my palm, a small, sharp pain that grounded me in the horrifying reality of the moment. I looked down the long, empty road where my family had vanished. Then I looked back at the impersonal, brightly lit rest stop. I was 12 years old, stranded hundreds of miles from a place I was supposed to call home. And in that moment, as the last bit of daylight bled from the sky, I made a decision. I was done trying to catch up. I was done running after a car that would never stop for me. I was done. The first hour after they left was a blur of shock and a strange, hollow calm. The sunset, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple that felt like a cruel joke, a beautiful backdrop to the ugliest moment of my life. I walked back from the on-ramp to the main rest stop building, my legs feeling like lead. Every passing car on the highway was a fresh wave of confirmation. They were not coming back. The laughter, the casual cruelty of it all, had made that clear. This was not an accident. I sat on the same bench under the oak tree, watching as the rest stop transitioned from day to night. Families came and went, their cars pulling in, kids spilling out, parents corralling them with a mixture of exhaustion and affection. Each scene was a small, sharp jab to my heart. I was an invisible ghost haunting this brightly lit purgatory, a spectator to a world of belonging that had just been violently ripped away from me. Eventually, a state trooper doing his nightly patrol noticed me. He was a large man with a kind face and tired eyes. He slowed his cruiser, rolled down the window, and asked if I was okay. The question was so simple, yet so overwhelmingly complex. I opened my mouth to answer, and what came out was a dry, choked sob. The dam of composure I had so carefully constructed finally broke. The whole story tumbled out, a messy, tear-soaked confession of the last few hours. He listened patiently, his expression shifting from professional concern to genuine disbelief and then to a quiet, simmering anger on my behalf. He took me inside, bought me a hot chocolate, and made a series of calls. He spoke in a low, serious voice, using words like abandonment and child endangerment. The words felt foreign, clinical terms for the raw, gaping wound that had been torn open in my life. He asked for my home address, for my relatives' phone numbers. I gave them to him, but I knew, with a certainty that chilled me to the bone, that it wouldn't matter. A call from a police officer wouldn't magically transform my father into a caring man or my mother into a protective one. I was right. The trooper eventually came back and sat down opposite me in the vinyl booth, his face grim. "We reached your father," he said gently. "He claimed it was a misunderstanding. He said he thought you were asleep in the back of the car and that they'd turn around as soon as they realized." It was such a flimsy, pathetic lie. The open door, Kevin's taunts, my father's laughter, they all screamed the truth. The trooper knew it was a lie, too. I could see it in his eyes. He told me they were ordering my parents to return, but the legalities were complicated. For now, I would be taken into the care of Child Protective Services. That night, I slept in a sterile, unfamiliar room in an emergency shelter. The next few days were a whirlwind of interviews, paperwork, and the dawning horror that my old life was well and truly over. My parents never came. They fought the order, hiring a cheap lawyer to argue that it was all a terrible mistake, and that I was a difficult, dramatic child prone to exag. Ration, they were painting me as the problem, a narrative they had been crafting for years. It was the final, cowardly betrayal. The state, seeing their lack of remorse and their immediate attempts to blame a 12-year-old child, made a decision. I was officially placed in the foster care system. My first foster home was crowded and chaotic. I retreated further into myself, my sketchbook becoming my only confidant. I drew buildings, strong, impenetrable fortresses with high walls and deep foundations. They were everything I craved: stability, security, permanence. After a few months, I was moved. That's when I met Sarah Jenkins. Sarah wasn't a foster parent, she was my new caseworker. She was in her late 40s at the time, with short, practical graying hair, intelligent eyes that missed nothing, and a calm, steady presence that felt like an anchor in my turbulent world. Unlike the other adults who had drifted through my life, all full of false pity and clinical detachment, Sarah spoke to me like I was a person. She asked about my drawings, not with condescension, but with genuine curiosity. She saw the intricate details in my designs, the longing for order and safety that I was pouring onto the page. "You have an architect's eye," she told me one afternoon, looking over a detailed cross-section I'd drawn of a stone castle. "You see how things fit together." It was the first time anyone had ever validated my passion, and it felt like a key turning in a lock I didn't even know was there. Sarah became my fierce advocate. She saw the damage my family had done, the deep-seated belief I had that I was unworthy of love or care. She worked tirelessly, not just to find me a better placement, but to help me rebuild my sense of self. When another foster home fell through, Sarah did something extraordinary. She, a single woman with no children of her own, applied to become my foster parent. She told her supervisors that she couldn't, in good conscience, send me back into the uncertainty of the system. She was offering me a home. I moved into her small, cozy house, filled with books and plants and the smell of freshly brewed tea. For the first time in my life, I had my own room, a space that was entirely mine. Sarah didn't try to replace my mother. She did something far more important. She became my mentor, my champion, and my friend. She taught me that family wasn't about blood. It was about showing up. It was about seeing someone for who they are and choosing to love them, not out of obligation, but out of a deep and genuine connection. In the quiet safety of her home, surrounded by her unwavering support, I slowly, cautiously, began to build a new life on a foundation of kindness and respect, a foundation that could never be shaken. Life with Sarah was a revelation. It was a quiet, steady education in what it meant to be cared for. The constant, low-level anxiety that had been my companion for 12 years slowly began to recede. There were no mind games, no passive aggression, no daily battles for affection or even basic acknowledgement. There was just consistency. Sarah woke up at the same time every morning. She made coffee that filled the small house with a rich, comforting aroma. She would ask about my day, and she would actually listen to the answer, her eyes focused on me, her attention undivided. These were small things, but for a child who had been treated as an accessory, they were monumental. She established routines that were about comfort and stability, not control. We had dinner together at the dining room table every night. We went to the library on Saturdays and the farmer's market on Sundays. These simple, predictable rhythms were the scaffolding upon which I started to rebuild my world. My passion for drawing, once a secret act of defiance, became a celebrated talent. Sarah bought me professional drafting tools, books on architectural history, and a proper drawing table for my room. She never called my drawings stupid doodles. She called them blueprints. She saw my obsession with structure and form not as a strange quirk, but as a calling. "Buildings are honest," I told her once, trying to explain why I preferred drawing them to drawing people. "A wall is a wall." A foundation is a foundation. If it's built right, it will stand. It won't change its mind. It won't get angry and leave. Sarah had nodded, her expression full of a profound understanding that made me feel seen in a way I never had before. Then you'll just have to make sure you build everything in your life on the strongest foundation possible, she had replied. That conversation became a guiding principle for me. School, which had once been a place to simply disappear, became an opportunity. With Sarah's encouragement, I joined the math club and the debate team. I started to find my voice, realizing that my opinions were valid and my intellect was something to be proud of, not hidden. I excelled, driven by a ferocious desire to prove, mostly to myself, that my father's assessment of me as a waste of space was wrong. Every A on my report card, every academic award, was another brick in the fortress I was building around myself. It was a fortress of competence and self-reliance. My biological family made a few half-hearted attempts to re-enter the picture in those first couple of years. There were letters, filtered through the social services system, full of my mother's weak apologies and my father's self-serving justifications. They never once took full responsibility. It was always a joke that went too far, or a terrible misunderstanding. They framed themselves as the victims, heartbroken parents who had their troubled daughter taken from them. I read the first 2 letters with Sarah by my side. After the second one, I told her I didn't want to see any more. They were just words on a page, more empty structures with no foundation. They meant nothing. The biggest step came when I was 16. With Sarah's help and a pro bono lawyer she found through her network, I petitioned the court to terminate my biological parents' rights permanently. It was a daunting process. I had to stand before a judge and recount the day at the rest stop, the years of emotional neglect that preceded it, and the profound sense of peace and stability I had found with Sarah. My parents were there. It was the first time I had seen them in 4 years. My father looked smaller somehow, his usual bluster replaced by a sullen resentment. My mother just wept silently, dabbing her eyes with a tissue. They looked like strangers. The judge listened to my testimony, reviewed the records from social services, and made his decision. Their rights were terminated. In that moment, a massive weight I didn't even realize I was still carrying lifted off my shoulders. I was free. The next step was adoption. A few months later, in that same courthouse, I legally became Jane Jenkins. I had a new name, a new family, a new life. The old blueprint was gone, thrown away like the trash it was. I was now drawing my own. My focus on architecture became laser-sharp. It was my path forward, the tangible proof that I could create something lasting and beautiful out of nothing. Sarah supported my dream completely, helping me with college applications and financial aid forms. I got a full scholarship to a top university's architecture program. The day I received my acceptance letter, Sarah framed it and hung it in the living room. She was more proud than my biological parents had ever been about anything Kevin had ever accomplished. Leaving for college was hard, the first time I would be living away from the safe haven Sarah had created. But she had given me something my parents never had, the confidence to stand on my own 2 feet. She had built me up, not torn me down. As I packed my bags, I knew I wasn't just going to college to learn how to design buildings. I was going to learn how to design a future so bright and so solid that no shadows from the past could ever touch it. The little girl left on the side of the road was gone. In her place was a young woman with a blueprint in her hand and a clear vision of the empire she was about to build. College was more than an education. It was an immersion. I threw myself into the world of architecture with a singular, all-consuming focus. While other students were navigating the social landscapes of parties and relationships, I was in the studio, losing track of time amid sketches, models, and blueprints. The language of load-bearing walls, cantilevered beams, and structural integrity was a language I understood instinctively. It was a world of logic, physics, and creativity, a place where a solid plan and meticulous execution yielded a predictable, stable result. There were no emotional landmines, no hidden agendas. A structure either stood or it fell based on the quality of its design and construction. It was the antithesis of the chaotic, unreliable world I had escaped. My professors saw my dedication not as obsessive, but as a rare form of passion. I wasn't just completing assignments. I was trying to solve problems, to create spaces that were not only beautiful, but also safe, functional, and enduring. I absorbed everything, from the brutalist honesty of concrete to the elegant complexity of a suspension bridge. My past was a sealed vault. I never spoke of it. To my friends and colleagues, I was Jane Jenkins, a brilliant and fiercely independent student who had seemingly emerged from nowhere. If anyone asked about my family, I would give a vague, polite answer about being raised by my mother, Sarah, a retired social worker. It was the truth, just not the whole truth. The silence was not born of shame, but of a pragmatic need for self-preservation. My history was a faulty foundation, and I had no intention of building my new life on top of it. To speak of the Reeds would be to give them a presence in my life, to acknowledge that their ghost still had the power to haunt me. I refused to grant them that. My silence was my power. It was a wall, thick and impenetrable, and on the other side of it, they simply ceased to exist. I graduated at the top of my class, my portfolio already filled with award-winning designs. I was recruited by several top firms, but I chose one known for its innovative, large-scale urban projects. It was the kind of work that would allow me to shape skylines, to create landmarks that would stand for generations. My career became my everything. I worked tirelessly, fueled by a relentless drive to succeed. Every project I completed, every skyscraper that rose under my guidance, was another testament to my resilience. I wasn't just building structures of steel and glass. I was building a reputation, an identity, a legacy that was entirely my own. Years passed. I climbed the corporate ladder with breathtaking speed. I became a project manager, then a senior architect, and finally, a lead architect, one of the youngest in the firm's history. I bought my own apartment, a minimalist space with clean lines and panoramic city views. I filled it with books on design and art, not with memories of a past I didn't claim. My life was my work. I had professional acquaintances, respected colleagues, and a few close friends who understood and respected my boundaries. I dated occasionally, but I kept an emotional distance, always wary of letting anyone get close enough to see the cracks in my carefully constructed facade. The idea of depending on someone, of being vulnerable, was terrifying. My one constant, my true north, was Sarah. We spoke every Sunday, our calls a comforting ritual. She celebrated my successes with unbridled joy and offered quiet wisdom whenever I faced a challenge. She was the one person who knew the entire story, the keeper of my past, and the cheering section for my future. She never pushed me to confront my history or to seek out the Reeds. She understood that my healing was on my own terms, and that for me, healing meant building a life so full and successful that there was simply no room left for them. And so I built my empire of silence. It was a kingdom of one, ruled by logic, discipline, and hard work. I was respected, admired, and professionally fulfilled. From the outside, my life was a picture of perfect success, and in many ways it was. I had achieved everything I had ever dreamed of. I had a name that was mine, a home that was safe, and a career that gave me a profound sense of purpose. But sometimes, in the dead of night, when the city lights glittered below my window like a blanket of scattered diamonds, a sliver of the past would find its way through the cracks. A memory of my father's laugh, a flash of my mother's averted eyes, the image of those disappearing taillights. It wasn't a feeling of sadness or loss. It was a cold, hard knot of anger, a reminder of the fuel that had powered my ascent. It was a reminder that my fortress was built not just to keep the world out, but to keep a wounded 12-year-old girl safely inside, protected by the high, unbreachable walls of the life I had built for her. I had buried the name Jane Reed so deep that I sometimes forgot she had ever existed. I was Jane Jenkins, the architect, and I was convinced that was all I ever needed to be. The day it happened began like any other Tuesday. It was crisp and clear, the autumn light slanting through my office window on the 45th floor, illuminating the dust motes dancing in the air. I was deep in a review of the structural blueprints for a new museum complex, a landmark project my team had been working on for over a year. My world was one of millimeters and stress tolerances, a universe of precision where every line had a purpose. My assistant, a sharp and efficient young woman named Chloe, buzzed me through the intercom. "Jane," she said, her voice tinged with an unusual note of hesitation. "There are some people here to see you. They don't have an appointment." I frowned, my pen hovering over a section of the blueprint. Unscheduled visitors were rare, and Chloe was an expert at politely but firmly turning them away. "Did they say what it's regarding?" I asked, my tone impatient. I didn't have time for unscheduled distractions. There was a pause. They say they're your family," Chloe said, her voice dropping to a near whisper, as if she knew the words were a grenade. "A Richard, Brenda, and Kevin Reed." The pen slipped from my fingers, leaving a small, black streak across the pristine white paper. Reed. The name felt like a foreign object in my mouth, a word I hadn't spoken or heard in 22 years. For a moment, the world tilted on its axis. The solid, predictable angles of my office seemed to waver. I could hear the blood pounding in my ears, a frantic drumbeat against the sudden, deafening silence. My first instinct was a primal, gut-wrenching no. No, it wasn't possible. They were ghosts, figures from a buried lifetime, a nightmare I had out-architected. "Tell them they're mistaken," I said, my voice coming out colder and harder than I intended. "I don't know anyone by that name. Tell them to leave." Another pause from Chloe, longer this time. "I tried, Jane," she said, her voice full of apology. They're refusing to go. The man, Richard, is causing a bit of a scene. Security is on their way up." A scene, of course. My father had always loved an audience. Humiliation was his currency. A wave of ice-cold fury washed over me, extinguishing the initial shock. This was my building, my office, my world. They had no right to be here, to bring their chaos and their toxicity into the sanctuary I had so meticulously constructed. They would not do this to me here. "No," I said, my voice now steady and controlled. "Cancel security. I'll handle it. Send them up." I hung up before Chloe could reply. I stood up and walked to the floor-to-ceiling window, my hands clasped behind my back. I looked down at the city sprawling below, a complex and beautiful machine that I understood, that I helped to build. I took a deep, centering breath. The girl who ran after their car was gone. The girl who cried in a state trooper's cruiser was a ghost. I was Dr. Jane Jenkins, and I would meet them on my own terms, on my own ground. When the elevator chimed, I turned from the window. My office door opened, and Chloe, looking pale and anxious, ushered them in. They were older, of course, but instantly recognizable, like faded photographs come to life. Richard was stooped, his once imposing frame shrunken. His bravado had curdled into a kind of shabby desperation. His clothes were cheap, his face puffy and florid. Brenda was thin and frail, her hair a wiry, dyed brown. She wrung her hands, her eyes darting around my office, a cavern of minimalist design and expensive taste, as if she had landed on an alien planet. And Kevin. My brother, the golden boy, looked defeated. His athletic build had softened into a paunch, his hairline was receding, and his eyes held the dull, resentful sheen of a man whose life hadn't gone according to plan. They stood clustered together just inside the doorway, looking utterly out of place against the backdrop of polished concrete and chrome. For a long moment, nobody spoke. They stared at me, their expressions a mixture of awe, disbelief, and a dawning, grasping hope. I stared back, my face a carefully composed mask of professional neutrality. I did not offer them a seat. Finally, Richard cleared his throat, attempting to summon some of his old, booming authority. "Janie," he said, the old nickname a grotesque parody. "You look. Well, we were in the city, thought we'd stop by and—" His voice trailed off, the lie too flimsy to sustain itself in the face of my absolute silence. It was Brenda who broke, her voice a reedy whisper. "Oh, Evelyn," she murmured, using my birth name, a name no one had called me in 2 decades. Her eyes filled with tears as she took in my tailored suit, the immense corner office, the undeniable aura of power and success that surrounded me. She took a hesitant step forward, her hand outstretched. "We're so sorry, please. We didn't know who you'd become." The words hung in the air, a confession so pathetic, so utterly reveal. That it was almost laughable. They weren't sorry for what they did. They were sorry they had miscalculated. They had thrown away a stone, and it had turned out to be a diamond. And now they had come to collect. My expression didn't flicker. I let her hand hang in the air between us until she, defeated, let it drop. I hadn't said a single word, yet I had never felt more in control. The ghosts were real, but they were small and weak, and this was my house now. My silence was a physical presence in the room, a fourth entity that was more powerful than the three of them combined. It unnerved them, stripped them of their pre-planned speeches and flimsy justifications. They had expected tears, or rage, or perhaps a fawning gratitude that they had finally graced me with their presence. They had not expected this. A calm, dispassionate stranger looking at them as if they were a mildly interesting, but ultimately irrelevant architectural problem. Kevin was the next to speak, his voice a wheedling whine that was a pathetic echo of his teenage arrogance. "Come on, Jane, it was a long time ago. We were different people then. Dad was under a lot of stress." He gestured vaguely, as if stress was a magic word that excused an act of profound cruelty. "Can't you just let it go? We're family." The word family was a bitter pill on his tongue. I still said nothing. I simply walked around my large mahogany desk and sat down in my high-backed leather chair. The gesture was deliberate. It put the desk between us, a solid, immovable barrier. It was a power move, and they felt it. I was no longer the little girl in the back of the car. I was the one in the seat of authority. "Why are you here?" I finally asked. My voice was even, devoid of emotion. It was the voice I used in boardrooms to cut through nonsense and get to the bottom line. The directness of the question caught them off guard. Richard puffed out his chest, the old bluster making a brief return. "Is that any way to talk to your father? We came to see you, to reconnect." I met his gaze without blinking. "Try again." The mask of a happy family reunion crumbled. The real reason, the ugly, desperate truth, began to seep out. It was Brenda who cracked first, her words tumbling out in a rush of self-pity. "It's Kevin," she sniffled. "He's in some trouble. He made some bad investments. He owes people money, a lot of money." Kevin looked at the floor, his face flushing with shame. Richard quickly jumped in, trying to frame it as a noble cause. "He's a good boy, he just fell in with a bad crowd. We've done all we can, we sold the house. We've got nothing left." So there it was, the punchline to a 22-year-old joke. They hadn't come for forgiveness. They hadn't come to atone. They had come for a bailout. They had read about me online, seen my name attached to high-profile projects, and like prospectors spotting a vein of gold, they had come to stake their claim. They saw my success not as a product of my own resilience and hard work, but as their winning lottery ticket, a cosmic reward for a long-forgotten inconvenience. They believed they were entitled to it. A slow, cold anger began to burn in my chest, but I kept my composure. I had planned for this moment, not in specifics, but in principle. For years, I had known that the only reason they would ever seek me out was if they needed something. I reached into my desk drawer and pulled out a single, crisp sheet of paper and a pen. I slid it across the desk towards them. "You want to talk about what is owed?" I said, my voice dangerously quiet. "Let's talk." Richard picked it up, confused. On the paper, in neat, architectural lettering, I had written a title, "Invoice for Services Rendered." Below it was a list. Child rearing, ages 0 to 12. Food, housing, clothing. I paused, tapping the pen. "We'll call that a wash. You were legally obligated to provide that, though the quality is debatable." Next line, emotional support and nurturing. Beside it, I wrote a 0. Next line, cost of abandoning a minor at a state rest stop. I began to write down numbers. Let's see. The cost of state care for 6 years until I was adopted. The cost of therapy, which the state so kindly provided. The cost of a university education, which I earned through scholarships you didn't support. Finally, at the bottom, I wrote, pain and suffering, compounded over 22 years. I looked up at them. "What do you think is a fair market price for that?" They stared at the paper, their faces a canvas of disbelief and outrage. Richard slammed it back down on the desk. "This is insane. You're our daughter?" "No," I said, standing up. "I am not. Your daughter was left on the side of a highway. I am Jane Jenkins, and you are strangers who have trespassed in my office." I pressed the intercom button on my desk. "Chloe, please send security up to escort Mr., Mrs., and Mr. Reed out of the building. They're finished here." Their protests were a path. epic crescendo of sputtered threats and tearful pleas as two uniformed security guards entered the room. "You can't do this to us. We're your blood," Richard yelled, his face purple. Brenda was just sobbing, muttering, "How can you be so cold?" I looked at the woman whose silence had been the deepest cut of all. "You are the ones who taught me how," I said, the words simple, factual, and final. As security led them away, Kevin turned back, his eyes full of a lifetime of resentment. "You always thought you were better than us. Today," I replied without malice, "you've proven me right." When they were gone, a profound silence descended upon the office. It was not the tense, angry silence of my childhood. It was a clean, peaceful quiet. The account was closed. The ghosts had been exorcised. I walked back to the window and looked out at the skyline I had helped to shape. I had spent my life building walls to keep them out, but I realized in that moment that I hadn't built a fortress. I had built a home, a life, a future. The foundation was strong. It had been tested, and it had held. I took a deep breath, the air in my lungs feeling cleaner than it had in years, and I turned back to the blueprints on my desk. There was still so much left to build.